Hello and welcome to another episode of Trash to Track. In this episode, this is going to be a first for me. We're going to be looking at an N-gauge loco, namely 34064 Fighter Command, made by Graham Farish, or GraFar, in the early 90s I believe. Now I've never worked on an N-gauge loco before, so this is going to be one big learning curve for me. This is a die-cast body on this engine and it is quite weighty. So before we do anything else, let's put it on a piece of N-gauge track that I've acquired and do the ordinary battery test to see if there's any life in this locomotive at all. Now this locomotive originated from a guy that built dioramas, and he basically built an engine shed diorama and never ran this loco, and it was absolutely caked in dust. It was like a snow scene when I first saw it. So we're going to have a look now and see if we can get this going. You can see the controller lead there, looks like it's crossed both rails. It's not, it's actually up in the air, so there's no short circuit or anything. But there's no life in this Battle of Britain engine at all. So turning it upside down, you can see there's a bit of rust damage there into that screw, and also the front axles on the pony wheel look to be rusty. But as the engine and tender are permanently coupled, I'm going to undo this screw here to release the tender, and then we can have a look at disassembling this loco. Now, like I said, I've never worked on N-gauge before, so this will be a learning curve for me. There will be people out there probably saying, no, that's not how you do it, but this was very much a trial and error, trash to track loco. You can see there the amount of dust and that I've just managed to get out the chimney, and the sheer amount of dust in the cab there. So looking underneath, I'm going to start undoing these screws. This large one here actually unscrew it as a long screw. It releases the front pony truck. And then I release the rusty screw at the back, which releases the rear pony truck. And then I noticed that to release the chassis, you actually slide it forward out of the die casting and the whole chassis comes out. The side rods and slide bar is only a representation on this model, which is lucky, as that would be quite fiddly to put back together later on. It's slightly worrying to see rust damage on the side of the motor there, but the commutator looks like it's been used, so the model has had some use in the past. I'm just going to release this last screw here to release the wheels and the pickup keeper plate. And then we'll look at servicing this very tiny motor. I mean, you can see how tiny it is compared to my thumb there. Just look at the dust and that's encrusting those drive wheels. And it looks like the pickups are actually a silver alloy metal and not nickel silver, which I'm used to. There's more rust damage on the front there, but luckily that just wipes off. And now I'm going to set about stripping the motor down. I'm going to give it a quick test first, and as you can see there, testing it directly with wires from a controller, the motor actually spins quite nicely. So this model is all it needs is a good service, as it's been stood idle and got dusty, and all the lubrication has solidified over the years that it's been sat on this chap's diorama. So now that I've ascertained that the motor actually works, I'm going to start by stripping it down. I'm going to give it a good dust over with an old stiff paintbrush to remove all the dust that was stuck to it. Then once I've removed all the loose dust and debris on it, I'm going to try and scrape some of this surface rust off here using this flat bladed screwdriver, and it is only surface rust. This is very minor. And then I try and find the magnet, and I find that the magnet actually sits on top of the motor there and appears to be quite strong, so there's no real need to remagnetise this at the moment. So before I get cracking, I'm going to dust the tender over here with the stiff paintbrush again, just speed the footage up. But there was a lot of dust on this model, as I said, loads of dust bunnies hiding in all the cracks and crevices on this model. Now that I've given it a dust over, you can see it's starting to look quite nice. The paintwork and that is in good condition, although it is missing all of its couplings. They must have been removed to give the loco a more realistic appearance on the chap's diorama. The model, the locomotive die-cast body shell has got some chips to its black top, so I might touch these in later on with the paintbrush. But now that all the dust has been removed, I'm just going to stack that at the back there, we can start by looking now at servicing this motor. To release the brushes and springs, you have to gently remove these brass clips which hold everything in place, and just by sliding them up there with a small flat bladed screwdriver, they pull out gently. And go careful with this, as you don't want the springs to fly off, because It's hard enough when double O springs fly off, but these are tiny. And the brush there just falls out. I get the spring out there. That was actually stuck in the holder, so I had to pull it out with the end of a scalpel blade. And then there's the brush, and that is so tiny. I did the same on the underside of the motor, released the brass retaining clip, and then removed the spring. But the brush, for some reason, in this holder was stuck, so I had to give it some taps with a screwdriver to try and release it. This didn't work, so in the end I ended up getting a cocktail stick and just pushing it back in from the other end, as it seemed to be stuck to the commutator. And there we go, it released itself. So now that the commutator's exposed, I'm going to give it a quick brushing up with a fiberglass pencil, followed by my usual method of methylated spirits and a cotton bud. And I'm also going to clean the gaps in the commutator plate with a shaved down cocktail stick, just to ensure that any old carbon buildup or any imperfections that have got onto the commutator are all cleaned off. Once this has all been done, I'll give the brushes a quick clean as well. But as you can see there, I'm just getting the cotton bud in there just to remove all the grease and grime that's built up on this motor over the years. It's a running motor, as we've seen before, so it only needed a good service, and hopefully it'll be back into tip-top condition. Now that that's all done, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give those brush holders a scooch out with this contact cleaner off screen there, because that brush got stuck. So I just wanted to make sure that all the old carbon deposits have been removed. And then once that's been done, I'll give it a quick wipe over with a paper towel there. And now we'll look at the brushes. And as I said, these really are so tiny. Look at them, it's sitting in the palm of my hand. This is the smallest thing I've ever had to work on. And it is it's testament to the engineers at Poole from the Grant Famish factory that must have put these together when they were new. They must have had the patience of a saint, because this really is miniature engineering. So I'll drop the brush in the holder there, followed by the spring that sits on top of the brush on a little nodule. Again, work carefully, you don't want to lose your springs. And then the brass retaining clip actually needs a good clean up as well. So again, with a cotton bud and mess, I just give it a quick wipe out. And as you can see on the end of the cotton bud there, the carbon deposits have all come off. And that will ensure good electric conductivity when this motor is back together. So I just push that on there and then gently apply pressure and just clip it back into place and ensure that the brush is pressing nicely on the commutator. And the same was done for the underside, and now I'm going to get the power control leads and give it a test. But before we do so, I'm going to clean this pickup base plate again with cotton bud and methylated spirits, just to clean all the pickups and remove any dust and debris that is on the base plate here. This base plate looks to have been modified at one end, and it's been cut into a corner, into a curved shape instead of its flat end on the other side. I don't know if they did that in the factory or whether that was the person that owned this model before me. So I'm just going to clean them up there, so make sure there's no dust or debris on there. And now I'm going to give the motor a quick battery test. Gently bend that wire so it picks up from the wire and also from the metal chassis block. And hopefully, I'm not sure how clear that'll show up on screen, but the motor is spinning really nicely. So now it's time to start looking at reassembling this Battle of Britain class loco. Before I do so, I must put some lubrication back on the motor bearings, as I had cleaned it all off, and it has been probably 20-30 years maybe since this was manufactured, and all the original lubrication is gone. So I'll just put some on the worm gear there as well. So that's some oil on the bearings and on the worm gear. Now the driving wheels are really dusty. I don't know if you can see out there, but again, get an old brush and just brush all the dust off from the axles and the cog on the driving centre wheel there. And then once that's done, again with a cotton bud and methylated spirits, I'm going to clean all the wheel backs, clean all the old oil off the axles, and then we can start look at reassembling the drivetrain. There wasn't actually much muck to come off this, as it had been a stationary engine. It was just the original lubrication that had gone into like a jelly, almost Vaseline type state. to get the cotton bud inside there between the cog and the wheel, I just pinch the end so it's thin, and then that gets in there and cleans out all that debris. So once I'm happy that everything's cleaned up, I'm going to start by putting the wheels back into the chassis block here. Now this bit was really fiddly. Getting those piston rods in the cylinders, as you'll see in a minute, was really fiddly. I mean, with my fat fingers, it's not the easiest thing to do. So I put the axles back in their corresponding metal bearings there, and then make sure the gears are all engaged correctly, and then I drop some oil onto the axles. Again, as I've used contact cleaner, all the original lubrication has gone, so you must replace it, otherwise it'll be running dry, and metal on metal wears very quickly. So now that that's done, I'm going to get the rear pony truck here again, which is very dusty, so I'm going to give that a dust off with this old makeup brush, just to remove all the dust bunnies and fluff that's gathered on it, and then I'll reinsert that into the hole in the rear of the chassis and secure that with the screw. Just going to give the connecting drawbar a clean with the Methson cotton bud, as there was a slight bit of grime built up on that. Everything on these N-gauge models is absolutely tiny, and I've got newfound respect for N-gauge modelers. I hadn't ever looked at anything like this before, and it was really eye-opening to see the vast difference that exists between the two gauges of 00 and N. But anyway, I've now put that back in there with that screw. That was easy to locate, as it was the slightly rusty screw that held the back in place. I'm just going to get the correct orientation, and again, like I said, the slightly rustier of the screws holds the rear pony truck in place. So now that the wheels and pony truck are back in place there, I'm going to move on to putting this wire back on. Now this fits onto a screw that fits from underneath and is held in position with a very tiny bolt, which I put on with the needle nose pliers, and then holding that in place, I give it a couple of quarter turns just to engage the thread, then hold it with my forefinger whilst I tighten it with my other hand, and then that ensures that that wire is connected to the chassis, ensuring good electrical pickup to the motor. So I'm just going to give it a quick battery test with the wheels. Now there doesn't seem to be a lot of current pickup. The wheels are quite oxidised, so I'm going to have to clean the wheels in a minute. They are trying to turn, it's just that they are quite dirty. So now I'm going to look at putting the piston rods back in the cylinders, and I've speeded this footage up because it took me quite a long time. Like I said, I've got quite fat fingers, and every time I got one piston rod in, the other one fell out. Again, newfound respect for the workers at the pool factory of GraFar who assembled these models in their thousands. They must have had the dexterity that I will never ever get with my sausage fingers. So I tried to reassemble the side rods this way, and then I soon realised that this was incorrect. You don't put the side rods on and the cylinder block on the chassis to reassemble it, as when you try and put the body shell on, it doesn't work very well. But what I will show you in a second is the correct way to do it. Looking at the die cast body shell, there's actually a groove cast into it that holds everything in place. So you need to reassemble this upside down. Here I am in a futile attempt to try and put the body shell on there. And as I said, it wouldn't fit, and I was puzzled, so I thought, well, how on earth am I going to do this? And as I said, look, there is a casting in the body shell, and you line everything up. The dummy slide rods there. The cylinder block fits over the top in line with the screw hole. And then holding that in place with my thumb and forefinger, it was a case of just simply dropping the piston rods in, and then once they were in, pushing the chassis up and sliding it into place. This may not be the correct way of doing it, but this was the easiest way I found, just to keep everything in place. Now that's in like that, I'm just going to slide the chassis into its die cast retainer and then reinsert the screw that goes through the front. Now looking at the front pony truck, the axles are quite rusty and I can't get them out with fear of breaking them. So I'm just going to put a slight amount of oil in each one and just run that up and down on the piece of paper for a second, just to get the lubrication flowing. And the wheels are very free rolling, so I've got no concerns with that. So the front pony truck fits under there like that, and then that long screw passes through the base plate, the pony truck, and into the body shell, and it secures it all in place. So it's relatively quick, this rebuild, for an N-gauge loco. I must admit, it was a learning curve and I was dreading it a bit. Now I'm going to give it another test on the old track. I have cleaned the wheels at this point. I inverted the model off screen and cleaned it with the fiberglass pencil, and as you can see, this model is now running really nicely. Just going to clean the wheels, as I said there, inverting the model with a fiberglass pencil, putting the power leads on the model, and I polished the wheels up quite nicely because as you can see there, they're really dull, and after they're polished, all the oxidisation has been removed. This was followed up by methylated spirits on a cotton bud, as you well know by now, and then I'm going to look at repairing that damaged paintwork on the roof. One other thing I'm just going to do quickly before I turn the model back onto its wheels is I'm going to add a small amount of silicone grease onto that middle gear there, as I forgot to do it when the model was disassembled. So using a cocktail stick, a very small amount of grease, and then I just run that round the gear train using the connectors from an old controller. As I said before, the tender and locomotive are permanently coupled, so giving the tender wheels a clean with the cotton bud and methylated spirits. This was just to remove the dirt that had accumulated on them. These don't provide any pickup to the loco at all, but it's worth having them clean, otherwise it will just spread them up to your track. And then upending the loco and tender, I reinsert the last screw to connect them both together, and then it's off to the paint shop. So I'm not going to mask it all up. I'm actually going to touch this in by hand using a very fine brush and some rail match black. And very handily on the side of the body shell of this Battle of Britain is a die cast line, which I believe is a masking line from the factory, and it allows me to run my paintbrush along the roof here without having to mask the green off, because if you're very careful like this, the paintbrush just follows the die cast line, and I repaint the entire top of the boiler on this Battle of Britain just to hide in all those chips and dents that it had accumulated during its lifetime. As this is an N-gauge loco, I've not got a turntable or a layout to run it on, so you're going to have to just suffice with it running up and down the workbench on the Trash to Track logo here, and it's running really nicely considering that it wouldn't turn a wheel at all when we started the rebuild. I'm just going to put it against my finger there just to run it in a little bit and get that grease and oil all through the drivetrain, and it is proving to be a very nice and strong runner. If you've got an engine you'd like to see featured on a future episode of Trash to Track, please email me at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com and we'll have a look at getting it sent over. Thanks very much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.